When I was a young boy, around age 5 or 6, I started seeing a man standing in the corner of my room. Well, man might not be quite the right description. It was human-shaped, but too thin and not proportioned correctly. He had arms that were too long, so long that his fingertips would brush the floor. His legs were exceptionally long and thin as well, with feet that seemed strangely large and broad. He had medium-length hair that was always slicked back and well-groomed. He didn't have a mouth, or a nose for that matter, but he did have two thin nostrils in its place. There were two sunken eyes that looked more like holes in his head. He always wore dress pants and dress shoes. He also had a button-up shirt with the top few buttons undone, revealing a smooth and pale chest underneath. He had his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The most recognizable thing about his clothes was the apron he wore. It was always clean and white. As a kid, I used to talk about him to my parents. They always assumed he was some imaginary friend, despite my frequent protests. He didn't scare me then. He was just there. It was weird, but I simply wasn't capable of grasping the bizarreness of the situation. Once I began to get older, I found out that other people didn't have strange people that appeared at night to them. That was when I began to get afraid. He never acted threatening towards me. Most nights he would just stand there and watch me. His gaze would follow me if I moved, and even if I got up to leave the room, when I would get back, he'd be standing in the same spot, looking at the door. Other times, however, he would completely ignore me. He would walk around the room, open the closet door, look inside. On nights where the moon was illuminating the yard enough to see properly, he would stare out the windows. One time I woke up to find him staring at the powered-on television before turning it off and walking away. A few times a week, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see him. Sometimes I tried talking to him, but I never get any acknowledgement that he was listening. He would never appear when I slept in the same room as someone else. When I would have sleepovers with my friends, there would be no man. When I would sleep with my parents as a child, he wouldn't be there. By the time I was in my late teens, I was beginning to believe that my house was haunted. I thought maybe he was the restless spirit of someone that had died in my room. When the time came for me to move out, I hoped he would stay behind, and my new apartment would be free of any creepy activity. That was not the case. Every time I would wake up in the middle of the night, he'd be there. I noticed that for the first few months after moving in, he spent most of his time examining the room. After that, he settled back into his routine of staring at me and occasionally looking around. I decided to buy myself a dog for company. She was a mutt, part beagle, part who knows what. I named her Lady. She was my best friend in the world, a furry little ball of energy. However, she refused to sleep in my room. She could sleep all day in my bed, but as soon as the sun began to set, she would get up and move to the main room. As she started to get older, she would just sleep outside my bedroom, but only if I had the door shut. She began to get tired and spent most of her time laying around. One night, I passed out really early and was woken up at around 2 or 3 in the morning to hearing my bedroom door open. I could hear Lady whimpering and heard her nails clicking on the floor outside of the bedroom. I was facing away from the door, so I couldn't see what was going on. I was incredibly tired, so I dozed back off. I woke back up a while later. It was incredibly quiet. I could even hear Lady's soft snoring. I rolled over to see the man standing in my room's corner. He was holding something. It was Lady. She was limp. I might have thought she was sleeping, except that when she was even too still for that, he was looking at her body. He didn't even react when I left out of bed. At that moment, a sort of fury came over me, and I ran towards him, screaming profanities at him, and began to hit him when I got close enough. He didn't flinch when I struck his head with my fist, and apparently didn't hear me when I yelled, "You bastard! What did you do to my dog?" I pulled the dog from his grip and fell to the floor, holding her body. I held her body and just cried. I sat that way for what felt like forever. When I finally looked back up, he was nowhere to be seen. I buried her body the next day. That was the last time he showed up for a long time. I met a wonderful girl, fell in love, and she moved in. For a long time, my nights were spent sleeping happily. The man didn't show up anymore. Unfortunately, some things are just too good to last. She and I began to drift apart. We broke up eventually. We're still great friends to this day, but we realized that we just didn't work as a couple. The night after she moved out, I woke up to see the man for the first time in years. He was standing much closer than he used to, no more than a foot from the side of my bed. He was staring intently at me. After another night of that, I began to go for long walks at night instead of sleeping in my bed. I would sleep during the day instead. He didn't appear during daylight hours. Then, one of the most terrifying things I've ever had happen to me occurred. When I was walking out during the night, I was not in the best part of town. There were not many people out at that time. Around 1 o'clock, I saw a man walking towards me purposefully. He was carrying something in his hand. As he walked under a streetlight, the object glinted, and I realized he was carrying a knife. I turned and began to walk away as fast as I could without letting him know I'd seen the knife. He called out something. I wasn't paying enough attention to remember perfectly, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, you, stop and come here." I bolted. Looking over my shoulder, I could see him running after me. He was bigger and faster than I was. I pulled out my phone to dial emergency services and ran into an alley. And as I turned the corner, I ran into someone. As I scrambled to grab my phone, I looked up to see who I had run into. It was the man. I gasped. It was the first time I'd seen him outside of my room. He lifted a finger up to where his mouth would have been and made a shushing motion. I could hear the other man's footsteps approaching quickly. The man stepped out around the corner, and I heard the knife guy say something like, "What the hell?" And then it got real quiet. I waited a few minutes before cautiously leaving the alleyway. There was no sign of anyone there, but the guy's knife was laying on the ground about 10 feet away. I went home after that. I was too shaken to sleep. The man must have done something to the other guy. What he did, I don't know. But I'm sure he did save my life that night. He didn't appear anymore. My room would be empty when I would wake up in the middle of the night. A year later, my dad died from lung cancer. At the visiting hours after the hospital, everyone had come and gone, and it was just me and Mom. I heard the door open to the funeral home. Mom had gone off to speak to some other family members outside. The man walked in. he walked straight to my father's casket and stood there for a few minutes, his head bowed. After a bit of that, he turned, walked up to me, and stared me in the eyes. He reached down, grabbed my hand, and shook it gingerly. He walked away, and I heard him leave. That was 2 years ago. I haven't seen him since.